Okay, I was worrying there for a minute. Cool. I'm the only person here. That's weird. Okay, cool. Other people are arriving. I was having a panic attack. I thought I was the only person that was joining class tonight. Okay, awesome. Obviously a bit of delay in the connection, but that's fine. This is what happens in Southern Africa. We have the best internet in the world. Hoorah. So welcome, boys and girls, to the party. Thank you for joining. Looks like we've got a nice turnout this evening. That's pretty good. Okay, awesome sauce. Let's kick into gear with class. And I'm going to take it away and start off with where we left off last week. Obviously, last week we talked about whales. Sorry, we talked about hippos and their connection to whales. This week we're starting a two-part series on whales, the final part of Artiodactylans. So in about 2 weeks' time, we're going to be moving on to rhinos and horses and all their buddies and the Pakicetus. And yeah, that's cool as well. It's a lot more interesting than people realize. Horses are amazing. 2 weeks' time, looking forward to it. We're rounding off the whales in the next 2 weeks. Okay, so going forward. Book of the week. If you live on the coastline, you have absolutely no reason not to own this book. If you don't have money, steal it. Hijack somebody. I don't know, make a plan. Get the book. It's phenomenal. It's one of the best, in my opinion, most comprehensive field guides South Africa has to offer. It covers everything from bird life through to marine life and just everything. It's incredible. Get this book. Okay, so going back to where we started in Artiodactylans was, of course, Dikodexis, which was a small chevrotin. Remember that word? Very similar to a daker, but very primitive. The ancestors of both deers and antelope, and they're still alive today in certain parts of the world. Asia's got a greater biodiversity, but we do have 1 or 2 species in Africa. And Dikodexis was a very early chevrotin species living about 50 million years ago. This is what it looks like over here, as you guys can remember. It's weird. Okay, so we also talked about Pakicetus over here. So Pakicetus was an individual species. Hold on, what this computer doing weird things? I'm not sure what's going on over here. Let me just close this down. There we go. That seems to have done the job. Okay. I'm going to put this back on. Okay, so Pakicetus gradually evolved around 1 million years later from our individual Dikodexis. And Pakicetus is what is called Pakicetus because most of the fossil remains have come from what was originally swamp-like conditions in what is now known as Pakistan. Okay, Pakistan was another country 49 million years ago. Okay, so a lot of the fossils came from that region, showing the greatest diversity. And these Pakicetus guys were small swamp-like mammals that had elongated bodies. They had, remember, solid bones as opposed to hollow bones, or not hollow bones, but marrow-enriched bones. As most mammals do, these guys have solid bones, indicating they had an aquatic lifestyle. And they had a lot of other features that indicated that they would have just been living in these conditions. What's interesting, though, is from the fossil records, is that we actually know these guys were living in a semi-haline environment. They can test the substrate and actually show what type of habitat the animal was living in at that time. And it was intermittent between fresh water and salt water. So these brackish water conditions, which would have been a more swamp-like condition, coastal swamp-like condition, like estuaries, like St. Lucia in South Africa, or the Mississippi. So, how do these changes happen, and how do they happen so rapidly? I'm going to use a basic, very simple mathematical example. It's not based on any hard mathematics or genetics. It's just to give you an idea of how these changes can happen. If you take 1 million years, and we're looking at a small animal, thumbsuck of around four years for every generation. It goes up and goes down. Obviously, bigger creatures are much slower generations, but if you take like an antelope or a chevrotin or something like that of comparable size, a generation every 3 to 4 years. In 1 million years, that's 250,000 generations. It's a lot. If you have a mutation of 0.0001%, 300, and it's a 0.001% difference from the previous generation, which is nothing. It's inconceivably small. You can't even notice it. you can expect over 1 million years a 25% change in that time. I mean, human beings and chimpanzees are only, we are 98% compatible, 98.5% if I remember correctly, compatible. So these are obviously ignoring all the other environmental variables. But you can have this massive, massive, significant change occurring in 1 million years, theoretically. And that's why you have these massive explosions of evolution occurring after disasters. You have this ecological vacuum, you have a disaster like the KT extinction, and all of a sudden you have this rapid evolution occurring. And it can happen rapidly under the right conditions. And, you know, genetically, there's not that much difference between a rhino and a horse, not 25%. They're probably 3 or 4% at the very most. So you can have these huge shifts in evolution over a relatively short space of time. This is, of course, ignoring all the other selective pressures, natural selection, genetic drift, you know, sexual selection, all those things playing a role as well. If you're just looking at basic mutation, it's you are marginally different from your parents, and your parents are marginally different from their parents. Far more probably than 0.001% different. Okay. Anyway, so that's just an example of how these occurrences are going to actually happen so quickly, a lot quicker than people realize. So, going forward in time, about 1 million years later, we noticed that our little fellow over here, Pakicetus, had started developing slightly shorter limbs, a more elongated body, and a slightly crocodilian appearance, actually. Again, a case of convergent evolution with mammals and crocodiles having similar, at this time, having similar ecological roles. They would have been swamp-like predators. So this little guy over here, he would have had holodont teeth, and he would have had homodont teeth, not holodont, homodont teeth, being all the same, identical, like a reptile. And these would have been designed specifically so that he could catch prey in brackish, semi-saltwater conditions like a swamp. And this is what this fellow looked like over here. He also had splayed limbs, sprayed frontal and back limbs, indicating that he would have had paddle-like limbs. Again, highly adapted to living in a swamp condition. Okay. Also, his eyes were on the top of his head, as you can see over here. Again, very similar to a crocodile, actually, amazingly. So you have these convergent evolutions happening with similar ecological conditions, put pressure on an animal, and the animal starts to shift in a certain way. Every mutation leads in a different direction. I'm going to put you on mute there, guys. I don't know who's talking. There we go. Okay. And gradually, these Pakicetus became the Ambulocetus, and over time became the Kitchener-cetus, again becoming more and more elongated, more and more specialized for marine conditions, and eventually becoming Remingtonocetus. Long word. This is why I don't get paid to be a scientist. Okay, and again, this only occurred within about 3 million years. Significant changes in about 3 million years. Bear in mind, to put that in contrast, 3 million years is about the same length of time between Australopithecus and modern humans. So if you take our ancient ape ancestors and now, there was also a big, massive shift in about the same period of time. That was only 4 million years ago. This happened 47 million years ago. Again, this guy gradually evolved further. These species evolved further and became a group of species called Rodhocetus around 45 million years ago. And you can see through the shapes and the body of the animals becoming more elongated, more specialized for marine conditions. We don't know whether or not they had fur because the fossil record was never preserved, but chances are they were probably losing their fur at this time and this stage. So this is just artist interpretation. And we have no idea what color they were either. You can't test that. Colors and pigments biodegrade very, very, very quickly. And eventually evolved into more marine-like animals. So there's this misunderstanding with evolution called progressive evolution. This is what people always see when they see like that ape to human diagram, and I think it's progressive, like there's a goal. It's not, there's no goal. And this is what a lot of these diagrams show. They show these changes in one sequential order from one species to the other species and saying this was kind of implying there's a goal. And there's not. What you're looking at is something like this. Actually, that is really what you should be looking at. You should be looking at radial evolution. Every species has offspring, and those offspring have offspring, and those offspring have offspring, and just goes on for hundreds of thousands of generations. Eventually, a line goes extinct within 1 generation or 1,000 generations. For example, I'm not having kids. My line will end with me. That's it. You know, from the beginning of life to me, that's it. My line ends. Sorry, I'm not cashing my chip. I'm cashing my chips. I'm not having kids. So any potential evolution that I might have in history is not going to happen with me. And that same thing happens with these animals over here. So they, over time, they'll have offspring, and they might continue for long periods of time, but eventually, chances are they're going to go extinct somewhere down the line, and sometimes they don't. So sometimes you have these lines becoming totally different trees and evolving in different directions. And that's why you still have, for instance, birds and reptiles. Birds and reptiles have a common ancestor, but birds are still going and reptiles are still going. The tree of life, it's radial evolution, not progressive evolution. So again, with humans, there were many species of humans until about 330,000 years ago. Well, there were 4 species. And they've gone extinct. We're the only surviving species because yay us. And the same with whales. There are many species of whales, but chances are many of those species will go extinct because they get outcompeted, and one lineage will kind of dominate the gene pool. Most animals don't pass on their genes. Very few do. So radial evolution is what we talk about when we talk about evolution, not progressive. And that's what causes a lot of misunderstandings with people and their understanding of how this happens. They get taught an idea that is very archaic, and of course they don't believe it because of course it doesn't make sense. So radial evolution, progressive changes, and this is how these animals actually evolved. So you have from this time to this time, 200,000 generations, 350,000, again 250,000 generations, 250,000 generations, and so on and so forth down the line. Thumbsuck figure. I'm not going to give all the dates because I don't have all the dates. Okay, so this is really what you're looking at when you're looking at a tree of life in terms of radial evolution. You've got our branches over here becoming the Artiodactylans, as we all know them, hippos, their closest relatives, which have remained freshwater. And gradually over time, all these trees have spread out. Most of them have died out, but 2 have continued to dominate the gene pool, which we'll talk about today. And some of them are more freshwater, and most of them have remained purely in saltwater. They've gradually evolved to handling 100% saltwater environments. We still do have some freshwater whales. Freshwater dolphins still exist, but they're certainly not dominating anything. Okay, so going forward about 20 million years, gradually we reach this fellow called Dorudon. And Dorudon would have looked like this. Very similar in many ways to, if you want to use your imagination, to a leopard seal, and also very similar to a dolphin. Okay, and chances are leopard seals, remember, they're predators, completely unrelated. They're carnivores, unrelated to whales, but if you give them another 10 million years up, chances are they're going to start forming very similar shapes to these animals. The environment's the same, the requirements are the same, and they're going to start developing very similar physiological features. If I had to bet, we won't be around for it, but if I had to hedge my bets, I would say it's going to go that way with seals. So eventually, Dorudon became gradually more advanced, completely lost their back limbs, okay, completely absorbed into the body, and to reaching an organism called Squalodon around 25 million years ago. Now, I've talked about this many times, and I think it's such a powerful thing, especially in ecology, and this is when you're studying ecology anywhere on the planet, be it South America, Australia, Africa. When you've got similar ecological conditions, similar animals are going to end up similar looking. They're going to end up all the time. For example, you had an ichthyosaur, which was a reptile around the time of the dinosaurs. You have sharks, which have been around for 450 million years and still kicking ass. Ichthyosaurs died out during the KT extinction, and cetaceans, which are mammals. All 3 very similar appearing, okay? The environments are the same. They're apex predators in a marine environment. Chances are they're going to evolve the same way. And again, chances are seals are going to evolve the same way in the future. Okay, and again, we're looking at streamlining. If you look at streamlining, you can even lump penguins into the equation. So convergent evolution is the process by which unrelated species evolve similar physiological characteristics because they have similar lifestyles. Okay, so another example, if you study botany, which we'll do later, if you look at the euphorbias in Africa and the cactuses in South America, completely unrelated beyond their plants, but they again look very similar. In fact, most people call them cactuses in Africa. Oh, look at those cactuses in the bush. No, those are euphorbias, completely unrelated. Agaves from South America, aloes from Africa. Again, completely unrelated, except that you make tequila from agaves, which gives it an edge. But they grow much faster than aloes as well. So again, so you'll find these sort of evolutionary convergences happening all the time in the same ecological conditions. It might not happen at the same time, but if you look back in history, chances are you'll find a species that looks similar to another species. Okay, now another example. I'm going to hammer this home tonight because it's an interesting concept and we don't realize. So, penguins and great auks. You've probably never heard of a great auks. That's because they're extinct as of very recently. So great auks were limited to the northern hemisphere. They're not related to penguins beyond being birds, but then so are canaries. But they've evolved independently in similar ecological conditions. They were limited to the Arctic and the Arctic poles, not the Antarctic poles. Remember, penguins are to the Antarctic poles. These guys evolved independently, and they were hunted to extinction around the 19th century. Okay, they're loosely related to puffins and a couple of other animals, but they were completely flightless birds that lived around Northern Ireland, Canada, Greenland, Iceland, and they were completely annihilated by the 19th century. In 1852 was the last sighting of a great auk, very similar looking to a penguin. So penguins only occur in the southern hemisphere, and there's actually we've talked about de-extinction programs before, and they're very interesting. So there are several genetic de-extinction programs that are attempting to sequence the great auk's DNA in an attempt to breed a living population. So they'll find the closest relative, impregnate the eggs, and create a clone of the great auks for all intents and purposes. So maybe in our lifetime we'll see auks in the northern hemisphere again, but they went extinct 170 years ago. Okay, so even more similarly, what's amazing is that sharks and dolphins are roughly similar. You know, they got a lot of things, but there's actually a lot different. They're very, very, very different. For instance, sharks can't breathe out of water, dolphins can. Dolphins and ichthyosaurs, remember these are reptiles that went extinct during the KT extinction. And were around 250 million years ago. They have so many similar features. I mean, all these features together are almost identical. That you would almost say, apart from the fact that you can tell the one's a reptile through its bone structure and the other's a mammal from its bone structure, occipital condyles and all that, they're almost identical. And that's amazing. That's extreme convergence, where you literally are almost producing the same species. Not quite, but it's amazing. Anyway, so going forward onto modern whales. So we're not going to go through all the evolution of all the whales and all the countless. I mean, there have been hundreds of thousands of species of whales that have gone extinct. I'm not going to go through all of them. We established that whales, that true whales have started to appear around 25 million years ago. They broke off around 35 million years ago into two groups. The toothed whales, which are the more primitive whales. Remember we said primitive doesn't mean that they're inferior, that they just haven't evolved as much. They haven't changed as much. There's nothing primitive about a dolphin. They're amazing. And baleen whales. So these are the two different groupings of whales. So baleen whales are what we're going to talk about this class. Toothed whales next class, even though by rights we should talk about toothed whales this class because it flows better. But we're sticking with baleen whales because I like them more. So baleen whales are the largest living animals on the planet, and they include the largest living creatures to have ever existed. Nothing has ever been bigger than baleen whales. They are monstrous. I don't think people realize how monstrous they are, and we'll talk about that today. So because of their size, they are just so gargantuan. They have to live in colder climates, and because of their size and their metabolism. Also because of their size and their metabolism, they don't actually have to eat much. They only have to eat around 0.5 to 1% of their body weight a day. In fact, not even as much as that. And unlike toothed whales, baleen whales do not use echolocation. So dolphins are a toothed whale, killer whales, sperm whales, they're all toothed whales. They use echolocation. Baleen whales do not, because they're filter feeders. You don't need to hunt down your prey when you're a filter feeder. So the earliest known true baleen whale that we know of is Mr. And he appeared around 37 million years ago as these guys were starting to appear, because he still was very primitive. He had teeth, but what we can see from the teeth is that they had, I don't know what this thing is doing, sorry. I can apologize if it's got this red box. I have no idea why it's doing it. I can't seem to get away from it. So later species showed a loss of organs used for echolocation, indicating a gradual shift in diet from hunter to filter feeder. So modern baleen whales are grouped into four families: the right whales, the pygmy right whales, which are not very closely related, they just happen to look similar, the rorquals, and the grey whales. I'm sure you've never heard the word rorqual, and hopefully you'll start to use it after we finish this class. So, hold on, let me just try and get away this box. I don't know why it's doing this. Okay, I'm going to just try close some stuff. Maybe it'll disappear. There we go, seems to have disappeared. No, it's not disappearing. I don't know why. Cancel. Okay. Sorry, it's just that box is very distracting. I don't know if you can see it. It's this big red flashing box and it's driving me crazy. Okay, so baleen whales are not, baleen plates are not true teeth, and that they're actually made of keratin, the same stuff as your hair. So there's a theory that can't really be proven or disproven that they actually evolved from whiskers in the same way that seals have whiskers and their walruses have whiskers, very similar features, and they gradually became adapted to using them for filter feeders because they were more effective than using teeth to filter feed. No real way of processing that or proving it because hair doesn't usually preserve on the fossil record. Okay, so baleen whales open their mouths to swallow water, thereafter closing it and actually forcing out the water. Okay, so it acts as a one-way filter, allowing water to pass out while actually trapping their food. So baleen feeders trap everything from plankton to fish to crustacean, depending on their diet. They've all got different diets and different preferences, and they actually hunt. So I know it's hard to believe that baleen whales actually hunt. So these are the baleen plates over here. I'm sure you've seen this over here. And so these are actually effectively modified hairs. They're not teeth. They don't have true teeth. And what they'll do is they'll open their mouths. I've got a question. Southern right are smaller than the baleen. The southern right whale is a baleen. We're going to talk about southern right whales are a form of baleen whales. So baleen whales, we're going to go through all of them over now. There's a lot of them. There's 9 species in total. And we're going to go through them in a second. But just giving you an idea of what it actually is to be a baleen whale. So they're large, very large filter feeders, okay? And they don't only eat plankton. People always talk about baleen whales only eat plankton. A lot of them eat fish. So, and they do it very, very well. So, going forward. So, the first group are the right whales. So, right whales tend to have larger heads and thick blubber covering their body with a lot of oil. And the heads can make up to 40% of the entire body. And they were referred to right whales as they were the right kind for whale oil, amongst other reasons, which we'll talk about in a second. And all members can live to about 70 years of age and are very slow breeding, usually only having a calf every 3, 4, 5 years, sometimes even slower with certain populations. And because of these slow populations, when they're hunted, it just annihilates the population and it takes them decades to recover. Same with rhinos. They're very slow breeding. Rhinos only pop out one every 4 to 5 years. 4 at a 4 if they're lucky. And that's the reason when you kill one, it can take decades to actually recover that population of breeding adults because they only become sexually mature at about 10 to 12. Whales also only become sexually mature at about 10 to 12, maybe 15 in certain species. So this is the actual skeleton of a right whale. This massive, massive, massive head. Remember, this would all be baleen plates over here. Okay, there's modified keratinous plates, which act like a filter. And what you'll see over there is still the femurs, the tibias, the hip bones, all over there floating, literally floating in the muscle. If a whale biodegrades, you're not going to find that because it's not actually attached to the rest of the skeleton. It's literally floating loose in the muscle. It's vestigial. Interestingly enough, snakes, pythons have vestigial back legs as well, which when we get to talk about snakes, we'll look at snakes and still having vestigial limbs. So right whales, they have no real functioning hip bones. They're completely vestigial. They're just there. And probably over millions of years, they will gradually disappear because they just cost calcium. So another bit of filter feature convergence is what they've noticed is between flamingos and right whales at the same time. This large crooked beak allowing them to open their mouths wide and take a huge gulp and then gradually push out. Remember, flamingos are not related to whales. This is just a case. Which word do I need to spell? You can say it. Try spell it.
Yeah, sorry, that little thing you showed under the skeleton, that floating.
Vestigial.
How can you repeat it?
I'm writing it down. Vestigial limbs, etc.
Thank you.
Okay.
Very sweet.
So it's vestigial.
Okay.
So it has no function. Like, for instance, we have an appendix. It's vestigial. It has no function. And, well, it has some rudimentary function, but we have a vestigial tail. Our coccyx is a vestigial tail. It's just there. It has no function. Anyway, cool. Okay, so again, another case of nature being very lazy in its designs. When I say lazy, I mean the same functions create the same forms. Okay, so you find the same things popping up again and again and again because the same requirements require the same forms to eventually evolve given enough time. So they didn't suddenly appear like this. Remember, it's taken millions of years for flamingos to evolve and millions of years for right whales to evolve, and yet they've kind of reached the same point in terms of their feeding mechanisms. They have that big crooked face with that large gullet and that ability to scoop up food and push it out through a plate-like structure. And the same thing has appeared twice. Kind of cool. So baleen whales or right whales, there are 2 genera and there are only 4 species. There's the bowhead whale, which you don't find in the southern hemisphere, the North Atlantic right whale, which is critically endangered. I think there's only 50 left. The Northern Pacific right whale, I think he's doing a bit better. Of course, if you're in South Africa, you know the southern right whale. Yay us. I've had the good fortune of bumping into one of these dead on the beach, and there was nothing right about the smell, I can tell you that. So, the right whale. Why is it called the right whale? And actually, it's kind of a dark name, and if I had my say, I'd get them to change it because it has a pretty dark meaning. So they were the most pursued. Remember, all whales were hunted, but these were the preference. Given the option, they would take these. And that's why their numbers plunged down to only a few dozen individuals in the 19th century, because they were so pursued. They almost went extinct. And this was for the following reasons. They produced copious amounts of fat and oil, a lot of oil. And that fat whale oil was used for a variety of purposes, from cooking oil through to grease for vehicles and wagons, through to hair products and just soaps and so many different things. They have the largest baleen plates, and baleen plates were also used to be very springy and very bendy, and they were used for corsets, for construction work, they were used for architecture, they were used for art, they were used for all sorts of things. So baleen plates, especially the very big ones, were preferred to the small ones. And because of that copious amount of oil and fat, when they're killed, they tend to float. Other whales usually sink. So again, rather hunt those, they're easy to bring back. And lastly, almost the damning final nail in the coffin, they were often found close to shore. Other whales were far out to sea. Right whales were right next to the beach. If you've ever been to Cape Town and Simonstown around breeding season, they come right up to the shoreline. So you see them there. And that's why they were referred to as the right whale, not the wrong whale. Pygmy right whales, on the other hand, were thought to be extinct until 2012, and they rediscovered them. So that's pretty awesome. There's only one species limited to the Antarctic belt. They have strayed up to South Africa and Australia before, and South America, but not often. They like it cold. It's relatively small, only 6 meters long and 3,000 kilograms. It's a baby, and it's the pygmy right whale. Again, this is the skeleton over here. You can see that same crooked structure because he's not taking huge copious portions of filtration. He has a much smaller face. Again, those vestigial back limbs floating inside his body. Can't see them from the outside. They're just deep, tucked away underneath the skin, amongst the fat and the muscle. Now, the rorquals are probably everyone's favorite, and you're going to realize you know their name. So the rorquals include the widest diversity of baleen whales, as well as the largest animals on Earth. The name rorqual actually descends from the Old Norse word for whale. And unlike right whales, rorquals typically lunge feed on their prey. So they accelerate and they fly up and they grab their prey and then they dive back into the water. So, and they snap their mouths closed and filter feed that way. So these guys include fin whales, the Bride's whale, the blue whale. Yes, he actually hunts, believe it or not. Now, the blue whale is gargantuan. It's the largest animal on Earth. And of course, the humpback whale, which I adore. So, oops, sorry, that goes over there. So the size of a blue whale, people don't realize how big it is. It's 180 tons. Okay, that is a staggering size. To put that in perspective, that is a woolly mammoth over there. That's a Tyrannosaurus rex. These are some of the ichthyosaurs that used to exist. That is an orc over there. That is the largest shark that's ever existed, Megalodon. These are sperm whales, which get pretty damn massive as well. And that's you over there. It's probably a very big you. Okay, so that is the size of a blue whale. It is staggering. It's incomprehensible. That's the size of a blue whale heart. Okay, you can literally crawl through the arteries of a blue whale. Okay, it's the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. Okay, humpback whales are more active hunters than other baleen whales. Okay, and literally the name, the scientific name for humpback whale literally means big hands. And they require these really large flippers to maneuver. And they're well known for hunting huge schools of fish and employ a variety of techniques to catch them. Remember, humpback whales have got these massive flippers of air. Megaterra literally means big hands or big arms, because he does have very big arms. So, one of the coolest things about humpback whales is they actually use bubble net fishing. So they swim around in a circle and they splash and they blow bubbles and they create this bubble net. The fish don't want to swim through it. They encircle the fish and they come along and they open their mouths and sploosh. They grab a big mouthful of fish, filter out all the water and swallow those yummy fish. Incredibly effective method and highly intelligent animal. Just incredible. So people obviously don't, remember, you don't think about humpback whales being predators, but they're predators. All whales are predators. And of course, the last, very critically endangered, the Pacific gray whale. Now, this is usually only found around California, sometimes into the Pacific, further out to the Pacific, tends to hug the coast of California. But what's amazing is that it was spotted off the coast of Namibia in 2013. And it was later confirmed by scientists that no, you weren't confused, this was in fact a gray whale. And this indicates the species may actually be extending its range, or maybe there's some radial evolution happening where it may be branching into different species. Probably not, probably just one individual is taking it and going on a bit of a holiday. But there we go, actually spotted well out of its distribution zone. So whales vocalize in numerous ways, and they're amongst the loudest and lowest frequencies made by any animals, probably only comparable to elephants. And blue whales typically call at a range between 8 and 25 hertz. And there's 13 known types of whale calls. They change individually. Just like humans, we've all got languages. Whales have got their own languages. And these also change over time with populations, and they've got their own little culture of language. And the languages can be used for numerous things. So they maintain the distance between individuals. They also use it to recognize each other and identify each other, to share information, to tell what they're feeding, if there's an alarm call, if there's courtship calls. There's maintenance of social structure, so they actually maintain the hierarchy. They talk to each other about the location of topographic features, where they are on the map, where they're going. And of course, they also talk to each other about prey. So there's a whole series of communications. They're not just making lovely sounds because it's nice. They're speaking language to each other. Highly intelligent creatures, and killing them for me is abhorrent. It's like worse than killing an elephant, but they're actually far smarter than elephants. Now, because of their size, baleen whales are typically limited to colder waters. And colder waters hold more oxygen and nutrients than warmer waters. Nutrients typically sink to the deep ocean floors and are effectively refrigerated. They are heavy particles and they sink and they stay there for a very long time before they biodegrade. And with baleen whales diving to depths of a couple hundred meters, sometimes deeper, they create currents and upwelling that actually drags these nutrients to the photosynthetic zone and helps phytoplankton, which are effectively algae, use them and actually are able to, of course, feed entire food chains. So areas that whale numbers have decreased have seen low decreases in productivity as well. So they're critically important for ecosystems. So over here you can see that the feces, dead animals, all the biological components break down and go to the bottom, far below the eupholic zone. They don't get any light, they don't decay. Whales come along and splash around, diving down deep and filter feeding, and gradually, just by, imagine if you're creating a current, you'd be swimming under the water, you create a current. These huge animals drag large amounts of water with them to the surface, pulling up those nutrients. So they're very important for ecosystems, for marine ecosystems. Unfortunately, we have threats to whales. Mature whales have no predators besides humans. And whaling is still in practice in many Northern European and Asian countries for cultural reasons. They're not economically viable beyond the fact that they're more cultural than anything else. Synthetic products are far more cost effective than whale-based products, but the scarcity, like anything, pushes up the demand price. People want it because it's expensive. That's it. So it's not better, it's just generally more expensive. Of course, pollution. This is a sperm whale. This is not a baleen whale, but I couldn't get a good photo of a dead baleen whale. So 100 kilograms of plastic was found in the gullet of this individual over here. So pollution is a huge problem for whales as well, and plastic pollution. So please buy biodegradable plastics and try to use as little plastic as possible. And why, you might ask, why there's so few species of baleen whale? It's generally with large size comes large diversity. The larger the species, the more space it occupies, and therefore the more generalist it needs to be. It has to go through multiple habitats, so it needs to be quite a generalist. It doesn't need to have that diversity. Smaller animals, because they're operating in smaller habitats and basically stay within the same habitat, they can afford to specialize. So you'll see, even with small predators, they tend to be very diverse. Big predators, there's only a couple of big predators. And so it needs to be able to draw from a wide variety of potential environments as it moves, and smaller animals can survive in specific habitats even if they move around extensively. And this is referred to the body size species richness pattern. Whales, of course, also migrate a lot. They have feeding grounds and breeding grounds. The two are not in the same areas. Typically, they prefer to calve in warmer waters. And many whale species have been known to migrate to 22,000 kilometers annually. Calves are usually in the warmer waters, and baleen whales, when they're calving, typically don't dive deep, as most of their water actually, most of their food occurs at shallow depths. On that note, guys, we're going to finish for this evening. Thank you very much for joining the party. If you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them for the next minutes. And we're going on to toothed whales, which are extremely diverse, and from everything from dolphins to killer whales to sperm whales, and are fascinating. So if you guys have any questions, we've got a minute or two.
Yes. Can you say again the maximum weight of the largest whale?
180 tons.
Okay, 108. Is that the size of a Boeing?
I'm not sure the size of a Boeing. I'm not an aeronautic engineer. So, I
was in the whale museum in March.
So that is, yeah. So baleen whale, let me put it in the chat board here. Chat. That is 180,000 kgs. That is how much a blue whale weighs. It's big. An elephant only weighs 6,000. A male elephant weighs around 6,000 kgs. So he is so much bigger than an elephant. An elephant, he would probably want to swallow an elephant without even trying. Okay, but there have never been any records of whales swallowing humans. They seem to make a deliberate effort to avoid swallowing us. Maybe historically there were incidences, but there are no actual confirmed records of baleen whales swallowing humans. Not one. And no biblical stories don't count. I'm sorry, no one survived in the stomach of a whale for 3 days. It would, the stomach acids would dissolve you and suffocate to death. So, yeah. So there have been no records. So these animals are gigantic, and they've, as far as we know, have never really eaten anybody. So it's just amazing. There have been plenty of close calls, but nothing confirmed. But yeah, guys, I shall see you for Q&A.
Are they still around?
Yeah, blue whales are very much around. They're threatened, but they are very successful at the moment. There are protective programs, and you can go see them in Sri Lanka. Occasionally they come through Southern Africa, not very often. But you can't usually dive very close to them because for protection purposes, they don't want people to interact with them. But yeah, we'll do more Q&A on Saturday. I'll be there this Saturday, barring load shedding, in which case we'll do it on Sunday. But yeah, thanks guys for popping by. I shall see you soon. Any questions, you're welcome to WhatsApp me, email me, you know the story. Okay. Auf Wiedersehen, adios, arrivederci, zaijian, sayonara, tot ziens, Humpback Whales. Assalamu alaikum, aloha, all the other languages, I don't know. Ciao. Okay. Au revoir. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, okay, ending.